Hi, welcome to another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm your host, Bridget Burns from the University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Doug Lederman, editor and co-founder of Inside Higher Ed.
Each week, Doug and I team up to have a conversation with a leader in higher education that we think you should be listening to. We're listening for voices who have a vision for the future and those who have inspiring advice and perspective that we hope gives you a little bit of like a microdose of professional development on a Monday. That's why we call it Start the Week with Wisdom.
And we're really pleased to have as our sponsor Weekly Wisdom Mainstay, which some of you may remember as Admit Hub. It's a student engagement and retention platform that has really tried to show how well it works through peer-reviewed research. It's done a bunch of work with Georgia State University, helping it reduce summer melt by 21%. And then there's another study that was done that showed how it helped Georgia State retain 1,200 students, and encourage you to check out that research and learn more about Mainstay at mainstay.com. And that's a good segue to our guest today.
Yeah, who's very familiar with Mainstay. And this week, we're really excited to bring back a guest who we've not seen in a long time. And back when he was last on the show, he was the president of Georgia State University, a longtime leader in higher education. He was also on my board. So, I mean, he was technically my boss. But now he is the president of APLU. And so that's a big change. It's an exciting change, but we're excited to have you on. Welcome, President Mark Becker.
Thank you, Bridget. And Doug, it's a pleasure to be with you again. It's great to see you both.
So as I mentioned, a little bit of a job change, super curious that I want to understand what you were retired technically. You had put in enough time, you had transformed an institution, you had this incredible legacy story of doing something that's never been done in higher ed at one institution. And I mean, for most people, that's good enough. And yet somehow you have gotten the energy. Well, we are not surprised because we know that you climb mountains and stuff like that, but somehow you get the energy to start a chapter 2. And so tell us about that and what inspired you to come to APLU.
Well, certainly. So yeah, it's all honesty. Yes, I failed retirement. I wasn't actually fully retired. I was, in my first year post presidency as an executive in residence at Georgia State, and was given a 2-year period as an executive in residence to basically figure out what, if any, role I wanted to continue to have in higher ed. And I found myself involved in a lot of different projects, so to speak, and realized that I was juggling a lot of balls. And then one Sunday afternoon, I got a phone call, said, Peter McPherson has announced he's stepping down at APLU, and would you consider coming to APLU and be Peter's successor? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that was a good second chapter, or next chapter, if you will, for me, because I literally have spent my entire adult life with APLU in some way, shape, or form, meaning from the day I started graduate school in September 1980 until today, I've been in either a student or an employee of an institution that is part of APLU. It was nostalgic back then, National Association of State Universities and Land-Grant Colleges. I was on the board. I was a member of the Council of Academic Affairs when we went through the transition from nostalgic to APLU. Was on the board, had been involved with USU. It's an affiliate of APLU. Et cetera. So it was an opportunity, if you will, to give back and to stay engaged with that sector of higher education that is the heart of my career, which is the public research universities.
Mark, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead,
Bridget. Now, what are the biggest differences for you in terms of being the head of an institution and then being, I don't know, what I would suspect to be both a wrangler of peers, maybe? I don't know how you look at your role exactly at APLU, but trying to bring the collective wisdom and power and of these institutions together? How do you what are the differences in both the job and in how you lead?
So first and foremost, weekends and nights belong to me now. I say that tongue in cheek, but being president of APLU is very different than being president of a campus. The heart of your question, at a university, you're literally on every day and every minute. You never know when you're going to get the phone call that something immediate needs attention, and that's usually not a good phone call. But it is definitely a transition in roles. I loved being a university president, did it for 12 and a half years. Was able to serve an amazing institution in a great city and a prosperous state, and so had a great run. But this is much more. The first thing is the mindset. There the goal was to articulate a vision, develop a strategic plan, and then execute on that plan, get buy-in, do the entire leadership thing, if you will. Read all the leadership books. This role, we're a membership organization, and we're a membership organization that primarily serves the leadership of its member institutions. So we're organized around 9 councils, and each council is by position. So a council of presidents, and another one for the provost, VP student affairs, VP senior research officers, et cetera. And so it's much more, if you will, about listening and being responsive to the members. So the premium on having what Jim Collins would call a big, hairy, audacious goal, from good to great, is less my focus here, and my focus is much more on serving the members, making sure we're providing value, and really striving constantly to see how we can up our game, if you will. A big part of APLU is advocacy, representing our members and their interests on Capitol Hill and to the White House, meaning to the administration. And so it's required me to, if you will, adjust somewhat. But at the same time, it keeps me engaged in advancing the mission and the value and the importance of our public research universities, our flagships, our land grants, as well as our urban serving and regional research universities. And so it is a change. It's very much a different change. It's not the same as being president of a university, but it's still incredibly rewarding. And the part that when you're a university president, one of the things that really energizes you and keeps you going is the engagement with students, the engagement with alumni. In this role, it's the engagement with our university presidents, our provost, senior research officers, et cetera. Talking, being able to stay connected with the campuses. It's most days of the week, I have at least 1 or 2 Zoom calls with a member president, and being able to make sure that I'm staying current with what are the issues and the challenges they're facing, to make sure that APLU is able to be responsive and supportive of them.
I'm curious, so it's a little off, curveball here. I'm just wondering if part of the reason that you were sought out to be APLU president might be because you did the undoable, that the student success work that you led was unprecedented and has not been replicated fully anywhere. Mm-hmm. And perhaps that was an indication of priorities, or just, I'm just curious if you sense that people are looking for you to teach them what you knew or what you had to figure out in order to do that, or if you just think it just gave you a positional authority that made it so that that credibility lent itself to you being a great kind of APLU leader.
Well, I don't know that I'd say that I was sold out to teach people. I would say that it's been very clear just by the number of invitations I get to speak and visit institutions, whether it's speaking with boards or the faculty groups or the leadership teams, that my past background and experience has been valued by the membership. And so, I would suspect, but I didn't go out to hire me, somebody else did. But that certainly seems to be something people have resonated to. And when I, engage with the members and have these conversations, it's not as if my present is separated from my past. There is a continuum there. and the conversations very much do resonate around, how do we, in this day and time where the public confidence in higher education seems to be declining. I think there's a lot of interest in residents around, what are we doing for students? How are we making sure we're serving them? How are we contributing to advancing society by eliminating disparities, particularly in terms of outcomes and the like?
We are hearing pretty constantly from presidents who are struggling with the job and with the sort of doability of the job. And I'm curious, as you made a comment earlier about getting your nights and weekends back, which I think a lot of presidents, they can do that job for a while. But I'm curious, now that you're sort of hearing and talking to presumably even more presidents than you were before, what is your sort of analysis or diagnosis of the job of the presidency right now, particularly at incredibly complex and in your case, all public institutions that are having to deal with very difficult, sometimes political environments, et cetera. What is your thinking about the sort of sustainability of the research and land grant university presidency? And is any of your work at APLU aimed at addressing that at all?
Yeah, so let me start with, I still think being university president of an APLU institution is one of the best jobs you can have. You just have to be prepared for it. It will be all consuming. If this is a job that you will take or the job you're in, it's all consuming. Back when I was in the seat, I had people that had entrepreneurs who had started companies, had been CEOs, had taken companies public, tell me that the job I had was much harder than anything they had ever done. And it's particularly from the point of view of the number of constituencies that you are held accountable by, or the number of constituencies that think that they have a right to hold you accountable. I used to give a lecture at the university in a course on leadership, and my first slide was, who do you think my boss is? And I had over 20 entities on there, including students, their parents, faculty, the electorate of the state, and alumni, and going down the list. And NCAA said, all these groups feel free to tell me what I should be doing and what my priorities should be. And some of them have the ability to actually influence it in a very substantive way, like the U.S. government, in terms of setting rules, regulations, requirements around what we do and how we operate. So it's always been complex. It's always been challenging. But I think what's different now, Doug, is we're in a political environment where higher ed is, particularly public higher ed, has become a political football. And this didn't happen suddenly. I saw it happening over the last decade. There was I remember being in legislative sessions where you would have members in the state I was in, Georgia, who would say, higher education is a disaster. We need to fix it. It's broken. And then you'd sit down with them in their office. They say, oh, Mark, your university is doing great. We love what you're doing. But at the same time, publicly, we were being used as a football, as a foil for what have become known as the culture wars. And I think that's what's making it much more difficult right now, is that the amount of media and public attention that is being focused on the issues of society at large through the lens of what happens on our university campuses has made these jobs extraordinarily difficult. Whether you're looking at the labor unrest issues that have taken place in places like New Jersey and Illinois and Michigan and California, or the anti-DEI bills that have taken place in places like Texas and Florida. In all cases, whether it's a blue state or a red state, we're a focal point. Our presidents and our institutions are a focal point. And I think sometimes the lens gets focused so tightly on one small or very specific issues that we're losing sight of the real mission of these institutions and the great things happening at these institutions. If anything, I believe these universities are even more important today than they ever have been before. But it's also, as Bridget pointed out, I've already failed retirement once. I've been around long enough to know that this is not the first time that higher ed's been at this focal point. Clark Kerr and Ronald Reagan, is a part of history people should go back and remind themselves of the tension between government and our public universities in times of social change.
Mark, is there just quick thing? Do you have any thoughts about what to do about it? And I guess, again, I don't know if there's anything. I mean, APLU obviously does work on professional development, other things. Do you have if you had answers to fixing the state of our democracy and republic, that would be one thing. But in terms of a narrower focus on what to do about the presidency and how to prepare people for it and help them do the job, do you have thoughts on what can be done?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So let me start off with, I was president in a blue city in a red state. And, the question I used to get when I was president is, how do you do it? How do you survive? And obviously I survived quite nicely for 12 and a half years. But that's because I stayed out of the politics of it, even though I was politically engaged full time. In other words, I never aligned myself with a political party. I was always an independent. And I stayed focused on the work that we were doing as a public institution to benefit our students and our community and our state. We received, over $200 million from the state. The overwhelming majority of our students were from the state of Georgia. And so, I always stayed focused on our mission. And then the other thing is I developed what I would call a skill that I think is very useful in this time, which is to be a chameleon. And the point being is that the language that I might use may be different in the city of Atlanta than it may be in rural Georgia, but I was always the same animal. I was always doing the same thing. We were doing the work that we were doing at Georgia State, but I knew how to talk about that work in a way that could easily be understood by people at both ends of the political spectrum, and understood in a way that they believed in it and they wanted to be supportive of it. That was the key to our success. We didn't view what we were doing as being liberal or conservative. We viewed it as benefiting our students and our state, and we did it in such a way that we were able to explain it to both audiences in a language that they understood. I think one of the challenges we have today, Doug, is I think a large segment of the American populace has become skeptical of our institutions as being elitist or separate from society. And I think we need to do a better job of listening and communicating in a language and with the people at the perspective that they have. In other words, stay true to your core values and what you believe in, but do it in such a way where you can engage whoever you're speaking with, whether it's at a Kiwanis Club, a Rotary, a public address, a newspaper reporter, television news, or whatever. Speak in a language that can be understood and appreciated by people from all ends of the political spectrum. So know how to speak blue, how to speak red, and how to speak purple when you're in between.
Yeah. And there are plenty of things I would add. For part of what we're doing with the show is trying to elevate the presidency as a place where they are doing a really important leadership job, and we should listen to them and learn from them. Whereas, when this show first started, presidents were getting attacked if they ever went in public because it was early 2020, and every time they opened their mouth, it was, give me a refund. So I think there's that, but I also think that any place that creates small spaces for presidents to share and talk to each other, because there is a one-on-one coaching necessity here. And so I do think APLU creates that space in your council of presidents and, frankly, the hallway afterward. It's also this, demystifying the presidency and frankly defending it. You got the comment of, your job is the hardest one. No, really it is. And explaining to people just how difficult it is when every person you interact with works for you or wants something from you, and the sheer complexity of the array of stakeholders with their conflicting interests that you have to make happy. I think there's something there about telling that story. So, but we're always trying to figure out how to reduce the turnover and the transition over here. So, but I want to shift to you as a leader. I am curious because I feel like I've had a chance to observe your leadership up close, and now at APLU, and I want to know how you learned to be a leader, and specifically from examples that you worked with in the past. Do you feel like you learned more from good examples or bad ones? And can you share with us a little bit more, like how did you figure out your model of leadership?
Yeah, so it's certainly I had role models and mentors, as I was quote unquote coming up through the ranks, and individuals that I worked with, particularly earlier in my career, especially at the associate dean level. Had a couple of great mentors in Sherman James, as epidemiologist, and Noreen Clark, the late Noreen Clark. She's now passed, but was my dean. I would first say, Bridget, to the question of becoming the real leader, the leader you are. I remember very well, I was out for a run with a colleague that we used to run together at lunchtime, and I was an associate dean, and had this conversation with my colleague Jeff Alexander. Said, Jeff, I'm going off to be a dean at the University of Minnesota. I don't know if I can do what Noreen does. She was our dean, and she was my mentor. And Jeff's answer to me was, Mark, you don't need to be her, just be you, and you'll be fine. And so that was probably the sagest piece of advice I got was be authentic, be yourself, be real, don't try to be someone else. But to your point, I started studying presidents and watching them even before I got to that point. I was a faculty member at the University of Michigan when Lee Bollinger became president. Was observant of many different presidents over the years. I'd say I've learned a lot from presidents who did not thrive in the job, whose tenures ended too quickly. And so took good notes mentally, but good notes on what are the things that can end your presidency, and took good notes on what are the things what are the characteristics and habits of presidents who've been highly successful. So, either case, it's taking notes and lessons from watching from people I know, but also people that I read about inside higher ed and other places.
Well, that's helpful. I think that's great. Doug, if you want to go, otherwise I would jump in.
Go ahead, keep going.
I'm just curious about, you've had a lot of really high points in your career, and but we know that what really shows your character is when you're getting your mettle tested. So I'm wondering what has been for you the hardest thing you've had to do as a leader, and what you learned about yourself in that process.
Well, the hardest thing always is when you've made a decision that is, should we say, unpopular with at least one of your constituencies. Whether you've been protested, MoveOn.org petitions. If you do the job long enough, you're going to be tested by something, and usually more than once if you stay in the job long enough, where your decisions are unpopular. And the litmus test I've always used is, knowing why you make a decision and that you did it for the right reason, and being able to, if you will, weather the storm of the noise, the complaints, whatever the case may be. And, so I remember, a lot of times over the course of my career going through whether it was as a dean, a provost, or a president, having to make decisions that, as in my judgment, were in the best interest of the institution, but may not have been the most popular decisions. And I think we're going to see more and more presidents dealing with a particularly gut-wrenching decision in that area as the demographic cliff comes. I was fortunate to preside over the growth of an institution. And, for people that have been in the business a long time, growth has been sort of a constant. And as we head towards the demographic cliff, and perhaps less mobility globally, we're going to see institutions having to shift from a growth mentality to a stability mentality at best, if not having to downsize or reduce some of the things they're doing. And those sorts of decisions are incredibly unpopular. And I think we're heading into a lot of those kinds of storms, regrettably.
That's great.
Mark, do you have as you look again, sort of presumably not even at Georgia State, you you've kept a pretty wide scan of the enterprise, but in this seat you're in now, you're sort of seeing, you're sort of required to cast a wider glance. And I'm just kind of curious whether that's changed your perspective on what, or deepened it maybe, and reinforced it, of sort of what the most important needs, what is higher education most needing to do at this time? Like what are the changes in perspective, or maybe doubling down on perspectives that you think are most necessary at this time?
Yeah, I would say sharpening of focus, Doug. So, as I, sit in this role and speak with presidents, as well as speak with members of Congress in both parties, and representatives of the White House, I think there's a real importance on our presidents today to speak about the value of their institutions in ways that they're not accustomed to. A lot of the conversation been, in the past has been, if I will, about a more abstract contribution that higher ed provides. This many $1 billion in economic activity. Everybody has an economic impact assessment to show the role of their institution in the economy, et cetera. But I think today people want to know, if I go to your institution, am I going to get a degree that is going to lead to a job and a career that I want? And the question marks on that are flashing really bright red and loud. The president of the United States wanted to forgive debt for 43 million Americans. That suggests that 43 million Americans may have taken on an amount of debt that their degrees couldn't support. That's at least an implication that people seem to see from it. We had surveys out a year ago, both from the Federal Reserve and from some private entities like ZipRecruiter. 40% of college graduates regret their choice of major. We've got, there's a lot of data points out there that are leading people to ask the question, should I go to college? If I go to college, am I going to get a degree that is going to, basically provide the kind of life and opportunity I want? Now, the reality is that higher education's value proposition has not diminished in the least in terms of the return on the investment. There's lots of economists that study this, and this is in this job. I've had some time to dig deeper into those studies. The Federal Reserve Bank, both out of St. Louis and New York, have done research. But when you dig down deeper, yes, on average, college pays off. But there are subsets of the American population that are going to college for which they're not seeing that. And so I think we need to be thinking, as we look to the future, very much not on the 4 average, but thinking about, how do we design the experience that helps every individual, again, back to being a student-centered university, helps every individual find their right path, get the right experiences so that when they graduate, they do get what they expected to get out of their investment in a college degree. It's a great investment. It pays off. But we need to be more intentional about those pathways and the outcomes that students are seeing. The other part is the economic engagement, the community engagement, the value of research. We need to be better at partnering with our communities, our companies, et cetera. We've got a lot of institutions that are great at this. Very proud of the APLU members and their level of economic and community engagement. But we're still not at a level where it's as appreciated as much as you'd want it to be, even by people who are our supporters, people in the administration, people that are very supportive of us. They still ask questions and expect more of us. And so, it is a challenge where our institutions are great institutions doing great things, but there's still a lot of questions. And the answer is not to say, but just listen to me. The answer is to actually be responsive to those questions and be able to provide a better response than we have before for whether it's students, their families, our funders, our community leaders, and the elected officials who support our institutions, whether they be through state funding, through community support, or through federal funding.
I agree. I think that just a more nuanced conversation, like we can't keep parroting the exact same talking points. And I'm not saying, I don't think the public expects us to have solved it, but they do expect that we listen to the critique and we actually seem like we are responding to it. Too often I'm seeing the exact same talking point, and just, it's a new day. So I like how you're contextualizing it. So in our last few minutes, back to the hot seat. That's where you go, Mark. So what is the advice that has most thoroughly impacted your life and your career?
Oh, I wouldn't say it was advice. It was an experience as a teenager, as I watched both of my mother's brothers have heart attacks before the age of 60, and have their lives short-circuited prematurely by being in a economic circumstance that killed them. In other words, being in jobs and carrying an amount of stress that they were not prepared to handle. It also would include, the American diet wasn't great back then. There were these things called cigarettes, but you put all that together. By the age of 17, I knew that I wanted to find a way to find work that I wanted to do, as opposed to work that I had to do. And that's what really propelled me to thrive in college and go on to have the career I had. Truth be told, my high school GPA was much lower than my college GPA. And
Yeah.
it was that because I was not the best high school student by any stretch of the imagination. I was just fortunate to be good at mathematics, which carried me through college. So I was motivated to take advantage of the transformative opportunity that higher education provides. And I'll say that, one of the things that I'm finding in this job, and this has been a surprise to me, is that as I speak with presidents, I am finding way more presidents than I expected who, like me, started out in community college and then transferred on to a four-year institution, got a PhD, and then end up being a university president. Were much more prevalent than I ever expected. I always assumed that everybody that became a university president, graduated at the top of their high school class, went to one of the most elite institutions in the country, and it was just a straight glide path into this role. But I'm finding actually quite the opposite in these conversations. Lots of people that started in community college, and then even more first-gen students. So I think to sort of your questions, Doug, about doing these roles and how hard they are. A lot of the people that are taking these roles today are people like myself, first-gen students who know the transformative power and are committed to making certain that these institutions continue to prosper and provide those opportunities for future generations, people that will come behind us who likewise will not have been born into it and had to find their own way. And fortunately, had an institution, professors, every individual I've ever met, every alum I met at Georgia State would tell you that there was a professor who changed their life. In some way, shape, or form. The metaphorical, tap you on your shoulder. Have you thought about med school, law school, grad school? Have you thought about being an engineer, accountant, a nurse? Whatever the case may be. That power is every bit as powerful today, and even more important as we serve a larger segment of society than the universities have historically, in lifting up future generations and more diverse generations. And so, I think that's, for me, has been particularly powerful is to come out of a world where I got to experience that, and now to be working with colleagues across our membership who are motivated by the same things I've been motivated by, which is basically to make the world a better place. It's great work if you can get it.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end this conversation. That is really helpful and profound, and it is so important to have public examples like yourself. You and I have shared that in common of being kind of surprisingly more underdoggy, and yet, filling these roles that we have this idea of a stereotype of who fills them. So I love the humanizing of it. And also I think that kind of resilience is necessary for the chapter ahead. So this has been a wonderful conversation. Mark, it is always a delight to have you on the show. Please come back, especially if you have news to break. And Doug, as always, you're an excellent co-host. And for those of you at home, I hope this has given you a bit of inspiration and perspective for the week ahead. And we will see you soon.